So this is so special to get to be part of. The group that TJ's brought together is amazing. But he brings this out in everyone, in all the different gatherings he's come to. He's been this sort of core community builder. He's reflected, I think, the strength in community building that you all are, represent and bring as well. So I think you all have supported him, support placemaking here and locally. And then, of course, we met his parents. He's one of these people you want to meet his parents. If you know there's some amazing people behind this that have a deep connection to place and are supported by this place, and in Peggy's Cove and Indian Harbor, the magic of bringing us, many of us there, and convening, and then the conversation, the alchemy of this group that he's brought together is incredible. So I want to offer this idea of place and placemaking, and the lovely way of phrasing it of our place. How do we create our place as a means to hopefully bring together this amazing group of speakers, and how we're all coming at this from various angles, and then how you all are coming at place and placemaking from many different angles. The resources, the skills, the ideas are here as well. We've gotten to meet many of you yesterday in wonderful tours of the city. But we think that when you focus on place, you do everything differently. Let's see. I'm just gonna. Oops. Okay. When you focus on place, you do everything differently. And the big ideas that Indy brought to us, there's no one better to open this up and raise the level of conversation and the challenge, but also the systemic change that's necessary. And I want to offer place as a means to sort of turn upside down the way we're shaping the things, to connect us actually again with the dirt, with the very local human scale in our cities, but then to use that reenactment, that reinvention of governance, of the financing of cities, of the focus on the common value, the common, that shared value of the shared connection to place, how that can reinvent systems of governance and financing at larger scales. And there's great momentum in that direction as well. So we're seeing people coming from many different causes to this idea of place. And again, whether it's at the intersection, there's some wonderful institutions right around this library that can reinvent this as in many ways. Whoops. And then, let's see. How people come at place from so many different, so much love from each of these causes. But each of these causes, at citywide or a global scale, we're working with leaders to see how place can more fundamentally address their goals, draw on their solutions, but also take them out of their box and allow broader collaboration and more systemic change and innovation. Because alone we're not solving our biggest problems. We're not changing fast enough. So we need new systems. And the ones Indy's talked about are really exciting and powerful. Do I just need to stand closer? So you could take any one of these and show how focus on place is disrupting and reinventing them. But we think this focus on place, we don't realize the extent to which we're shaped by our places, and to which they are shaping our potential, as Indy says, the way we feel about ourselves, our comfort, our cortisol levels, our stress levels. There's actually great studies. We've done some with the Happy City. The Happy City's part of it's based here. Charles Montgomery and Hussam, and talk about how the comfort that you feel going into a public space is really key. But it affects your health. It affects your potential. We talk about it as a luxury, but comfort in our public realm is key, is fundamental to our potential as people and as civilization. But we don't realize how public spaces also shape, and create culture and preserve culture, but also disrupt it and evolve it. And it's culture that really changes, that makes the biggest changes at fastest in the world in many ways. We don't focus on that, how coming together in place and debating how we shape our shared places creates culture and identity. Should I just... So we're shaping our cities in silos. We're shaping our cities with narrow outcomes, with narrow solutions. It's not that we don't need these solutions in these disciplines, but right now, if you plan for design and development, that's what we're getting. We limit the outcomes of these skills, of these solutions. I got to go to the Guggenheim Bilbao on my honeymoon 15 years ago. I was given a short amount of time to go there, and it was a beautiful building. It was a beautiful piece of sculpture. But as we got closer, the life of the city actually kind of died off. And I learned later that Frank Gehry said, "I do not do context." He also said that 99% of architecture is shit. And I've also learned that only 1% of the built environment is built by architects. So that's a problem. We need more architecture and architects shaping the built environment. But I think actually building not just for context, but with context and from context is actually the way to get there. And that this paradigm, this idea that cities have copied and architects have aspired to of just the icon alone is not enough. We're not asking enough from architects. This was the entrance to the building. It was hard to find the entrance. It's these stairs that make you feel smaller and smaller as you go down into it, sort of to worship the center of the building. This tourist couple was coming up the stairs and resting halfway up and looked exhausted. And so my wife and I didn't want to spend much time there. We wanted to see. We assumed that on the waterfront side of this building, it would be one of the more active, fun parts of the city. This is the central part of the city. The rest of the city's been quite wonderful and vibrant. But we went there, and this is all I saw. And I took this picture to illustrate a William H. White quote. William White was the mentor of Project for Public Spaces and my father, who founded PPS. I thought this image would quickly illustrate his quote that blank walls proclaim the power of the institution, the inconsequence of the individual for whom they are clearly meant to put down, if not intimidate. And moments after I took this picture, these two people mugged that tourist couple who had come up the stairs of their camera. And I'm from New York. Talk about cortisol levels. This is a place that creates high cortisol levels. So I'm from New York, and I had not seen a completed mugging before. I've seen mugging attempts. But there were always other people around that prevented them. And I didn't do anything, but I told police, and they said people get mugged right at this spot all the time. This spot's designed for mugging. But as you go away from the building, people start connecting with each other again. People start feeling comfortable. There were people around the building taking pictures of it, but they were consuming it as an object. They weren't connecting deeper with each other or with that place necessarily. And they weren't that comfortable, actually. Which is, it's okay, but we have to ask more but we can have buildings like that sometimes, but we have to ask more from them. And they can be disruptive. And many people in Bilbao actually think that building's a distraction from what that city is about, what the soul of the city is about, its identity, it's great, diversity and cosmopolitan culture. So Jane Jacobs, of course, one of our mentors as well, said that to approach the city as if it were an architectural problem is to make the mistake of substituting art for life. We need to design not just for people in life, but from life as well. So, of course, we've been planning for cars and traffic, not life, and the transportation paradigm is the limiting factor for our cities and for our public realm. And this is the experience you have, in many downtowns throughout the world, and you don't come downtown again. You can't develop a connection. You can't feel like this is our place when you have, again, the cortisol levels, the stress levels of crossing a street. You're more likely to go out to a mall. But changing this is relatively easy. And you did this on Argyle Street first temporarily, and now with a wonderful design. But it's not about being against the car. It's about being for people and places, for a much bigger shift than just a design shift or sort of a negative approach to traffic and cars. So we led a campaign with a lot of advocacy partners in New York City called the Streets Renaissance Campaign to create sort of a culture shift in the government and the way we participate in planning streets in New York. But the best part of it was actually the gathering of the advocates and the learning culture that was created through events like this in a city. That was where the capacity was built for all of us to better be able to shape our city together and making it fun. It was the relationships that we built through that process of actually, of being, really strong advocates about the problem of traffic. But we worked in about 10 or so demonstration projects around the city This is when Mayor Bloomberg was still about more cars equals more growth, traffic equals economic growth. And the transportation commissioner at that time was, very, very pro-car and so forth. But we built a campaign to replace that transportation commissioner and bring in change. And Jeanette Sada-Khan got hired, and she hired many people from our office and the other advocates in the city. And one of the visions we had developed out of that campaign was to look at Broadway, and we worked with the Times Square Alliance and others to transform many of these key public spaces. But it was the advocates that asked for these first in the communities. It's at the place scale, at the destination scale, that the capacity has been built for transformation, and that it's the processes that are so key. So we think cities can best transform themselves around destinations, and governance can be reinvented. And governance is often the limiting factor for the transformation of public spaces, actually, in New York and elsewhere. A lot of our first projects were, Rockefeller Center. We were given free office space in Rockefeller Center in 1975. We were set up by the Rockefeller family's foundations to put into practice the work of William White, and Jane Jacobs was part of those offices as well. But the limiting factors we found were public space management efforts. So we set up some of the first business improvement districts and downtown management organizations, and looked at really this human scale of not only design but really the programming management and the processes through which these spaces are created. So we think it's important not to just copy the design, which Indy's talking about, not just copying the High Line, but because we need to copy the processes, but read and do better on a lot of the management, especially the financing dimensions of these. The shared value that's created in each of these spaces is really what's transformed how New York is perceived locally and globally, but how they, but we haven't captured enough shared value, obviously, and the benefits aren't spreading enough to other parts of the city. But it's the stories of transformation. It's not cost-benefit analysis that would have led to any of these transformations. It's not a one discipline. Actually, the designers and different disciplines get credit for a lot of these projects, but the real transformations occurred at different phases, often from communities actually being somewhat negative, often from some controversy. With the High Line, it was preventing it from being knocked down. It was groups opposing development. It was more community-based efforts. But then how that negativity went into asking what we want, envisioning what kind of places we can actually have and want, and how that process built the capacity for community-based governance. And it's the governance groups that have really led and now continue to evolve, transform, fundraise for each of these places. The city allowed these things to happen and supported it at some key places, but it's really this community-based governance. Sometimes it's a business improvement district, sometimes it's a friends group. It's different models and different efforts. But each of these destinations works at the human scale, at the place scale. So Bryant Park, we did the master plan for it in 1980, but it works at this human scale. It's the managers and management of the space that's continually evolving and adapting the space so powerfully. But it's this triangulation. It's the things to do in a place that define it, and then we think you design to support that, to add layers to that. And it's that no one use or user group dominates these spaces, but that's where the magic happens. Jane Jacobs talked about these sort of intricate minglings, and we think the intricate minglings have to happen at this scale for cities to work at larger scales. So we've done these trainings in cities all around the world where we bring together different departments, different sectors, to ask them how they can work together to create places. And we often do this sort of Power of 10 analysis. What are your favorite places? What are your least favorite places? Places where you feel unsafe or a little stressed out or sort of not proud of that area. But then also, what are the opportunity places? So the Melbourne, Australia city, a very livable city, was seen as, when they did this exercise, and we actually did this for Vancouver too in around 2003 or so, and they, in the same time, and both cities, so well known for great planning and urban design, but the planning director in Vancouver said, "Oh my God, we've planned the fun out of the city. We created green swaths and public space. We've done great urban design and development, smart growth, and but we haven't created the lovable places." And same with Melbourne. We hadn't created the places that people connect with more deeply, the informality. We've actually prevented some of that by leading with development that defines the public realm rather than the public realm first. So we think there's this evolution of development, of how we participate in shaping our cities. From project-driven, which is about doing it efficiently, creating the infrastructure, the basic goals. Discipline-led is getting good skills, getting the most creative experts to come in and give you the best design or solutions. Place-sensitive, sort of the best practice amongst the disciplines. It's let's be sustainable, responsive to cultural heritage issues, get community input, come up with a solution that reflects that. We think we're not going to create enough change, and we can't create good enough places through that approach. Place-led is leading with the goal of creating great places, and then more importantly, building the capacity of communities and individuals to shape their places, to address their problems, and to create these new governance models, informal governance and formal, for shaping places, and it's through these places that innovation will occur in governance for a larger democratization of our cities and countries and so forth. So the private sector, the development sector, is an amazing partner in this. We actually find them the easiest to convince of placemaking, that if you lead with place, you drive value, you drive this common value that ensures success for the private sector. But of course, the private sector has been in a model of competing to take value. We have this taker culture where we're all, in most urban development around the world, and suburban certainly, is competing to suck tax revenue. You'll hear from Joe later about this. He speaks about it better than anybody. But we need to shift, we need to infect a new virus of showing how leading with place and common value drives private value, and that the developers doing that become the winners. So what is placemaking? So placemaking is a word we kind of helped make up about 20 years ago, and people are competing to define it. And an important part of the placemaking process is actually continually defining what it means and who does it and who's it for. And some definitions, it can be a collaborative process by which we can shape our public realm in order to maximize this common value, the shared value. There was a recent MIT study that found that Susan Silberberg that found that strengthening the connection between people and places, it's not just about improving the place, but the study found that the social capital built through the process of placemaking, through the debate, the conversation, that's most valuable. That capacity, again, that's built through the process of placemaking. So even if you know what the community needs, the process can yield much greater outcomes on many levels. So how do you do this? How do you create a city campaign in Halifax, and how do you connect that campaign globally for bigger change on many levels? So it's about making sure you're improving great places, focusing on tangible, doable things, and you're doing those things well. But then how do you connect those to broader capacity building around governance around each of these destinations or citywide? And how are they taking on bigger systemic change issues? How are they addressing your economic issues, your social and environmental issues, and developing models that can support the conversation globally as well? Because there's a lot of innovation that's ripe to come from here. So Project for Public Spaces has gotten to work in so many different contexts around the world. We're lucky to get to learn from place and placemaking in these sectors, and we get to go in depth in a lot of projects. We loved working in depth on your Seaport market. Got to see it yesterday, and how that can become a gathering place for drawing out the place capacities in this city. But you need a range of public destinations here. And then, as I said, we're working to create systemic change. And how do you gather each of these different sectors? And we all come at it with different languages and different issues. Sometimes there's tensions between them, but how can place facilitate the best out of these locally and globally? But it ultimately comes down to individuals. It comes down to, we call them the zealous nuts, the people that are really passionate about changing the way things are being done, that don't define themselves by one discipline or in one role within government. And so TJ and many others, Greg and Sophia that have been part of this movement in Canada, that Jane so generously convened and connected and amplified, is connecting to other movements and causes. In Canada, you have this placemaking network now, but you're part of a global one, and TJ was the glue behind. We gathered 48 countries in Amsterdam, and the folks that led this placemaking week in Amsterdam are here, and Hans and Charlotte did this incredibly beautiful, and have been leading the placemaking movement now in Europe with an incredible network there. And you'll hear from them soon. And I was just in New Zealand. They have so much in common. It was led by, we did different events with the business leaders, the elected officials, and the placemaking advocates. It was led by a Maori and indigenous woman. How connecting with the indigenous culture there isn't just about acknowledging the names and the connection to the land there, which is powerful, this connection to place, but the other ways of knowing, the more informal relational culture. Place and placemaking has so much to benefit from and learn from indigenous cultures that we're just beginning to start to understand. There's deeper ways that there has been an indigenous placemaking network in Canada that is, we all need to support and learn from in much deeper ways as well. So these convenings are happening all over the world. TJ mentioned China in December with UN Habitat. We're launching a placemaking network in China to figure out how to prevent them from making a lot of the mistakes that we've been making in the US and elsewhere. But they're going to change and come up with new ways, new models for us as well. Each part of the world is leading placemaking from one sector, but actually how they're leading it, they're actually blocking other sectors as well. So we have to sort of really network this conversation very quickly to make it global. And the innovation, Project for Public Spaces is innovating, but all these placemaking leaders and organizations are innovating, and the learning has to happen a lot faster. And it's fun. We all love hanging out with each other. We love being together. And we'll come here anytime and eat lobster together with TJ's parents. But in placemaking, it's a made-up word. It means slightly different things in different ways. Everyone's competing to define it, which is good. In the UK, it's more defined a little bit by development and design community. But there's a collective, there's a UK placemaking collective that's trying to reground that and define it differently. So we want that fighting, but it's being used pretty equally around the world on social media. And we've made it part of. We led a campaign with UN Habitat and the Swedish foundation, the Axel Johnson Foundation, called the Future of Places. TJ represented Halifax really well at these conferences. We had 100 countries represented to develop the key messages to include in the New Urban Agenda around public spaces and placemaking. The UN Habitat said we're creating a global movement to shape spaces into places to give purpose and meaning to space. Fran Tonkus from LSE said that cities are not built forms, they are social forms. We must design from social life, not just for it. How does that really turn upside down the way we think about cities? And then Saskia Sassen was at this conference, and she said that the city has long been complex but incomplete, and in that mix of complexity and incompleteness lies the possibility of those without power to make a history, to make a culture, to make an economy. And I think of one of the great comparative advantages of Halifax is that you're incomplete, and that there's great discussion and there's diversity of typology, of places, of completeness along your waterfront, throughout your city. And there's this idea that people here that love it can help shape this, can debate this, and you can attract people from around Canada, around the world to come add to it. To help complete it and to help create the place, the culture, the governance, the identity, the economy. And so actually as a response to the New Urban Agenda, Saskia Sassen with her husband Richard Sennett, and Dr. Close, who was the director then, and Ricky Burdett created these Quito papers that said that really what's key to making the New Urban Agenda work, to implementing it, is looking at cities as more incomplete, more porous, more complex. Many of the big cities are sclerotic, are complete. We can't change them, the culture of them as much. And it's the public spaces where this porosity, this openness, this welcomingness can happen. They need multiple uses, they need to be more flexible, and they need to be more informal. We need more informality. The type of the swimming that occurred at your water's edge, how that prompted dancing that wasn't planned. Those in the images of that's where people connect to place, where they fall in love with place, where they feel like it's our place. The informality is where the lovability happens, where people connect deeper with the people they know with themselves, with other people of difference. Our culture, white culture has formalized cities in the process of cities. Male culture has done it. The city reflects this drastically. We need to feminize and informalize, make more indigenous the culture of how we shape cities and architecture itself. Detroit is another city that has been creating this sort of new model. And we've been lucky to get to work there for over 20 years. It's the city we've worked the most in a range of contexts, in downtown a lot, but also in the lower income neighborhoods. More recently, this is what it was, a vibrant city that reinvented the economy and culture of its time 100 years ago. It even had food trucks on the corner there. But at the turn of this century, this picture was taken in '99. Through every failed approach to urban development and economic development, we'd taken the life out of it. Everyone was competing to suck value from place, from culture, from the environment. And we did that vision with the business leaders. The city facilitated it, but didn't put any money into it. This is what it was like 100 years ago, in '99 or 2000. And then this project, Campus Martius, cost about $20 million to build, and attracted a couple $1 billion of investment in the blocks right around it immediately. Corporations moved from the suburbs downtown to be part of it. And this is what it's like in the wintertime. Winter cities there's more demand to be around each other actually in winter, to find small places to gather. The markets, the fire pits, the blankets, that you can become a great winter city, of course. And then more recently, we've done this sort of lighter, quicker, cheaper plan with one of the companies that moved downtown, that was brought downtown by Campus Martius so still the private sector is leading, maybe too much. Each sector, our job is to work with whatever sector is leading, but then try to figure out what other sectors and what other groups of people are not included in the placemaking process and in the place itself, in the governance models and the ownership of it. The feeling that whose place is this is key, that it's, but this image that we developed was actually implemented within months. And the week that Detroit declared bankruptcy, we opened this beach at the center of the city. And this is what it's like sort of on a regular day in the summer, in the winter. And there's the beach. But it's at this scale that in a way, this has been a fulcrum around which Detroit has reinvented itself and how people have connected back with the city locally and globally. But during the Super Bowl, there was a lot of the images between the ads were of this space as sort of the soul of the city. So it's no longer about the skyline of the city, which kind of infrastructure, do you have a nice stadium or do you have a nice iconic building, but people want to see the faces, the culture, the places where people create and showcase their identity. And if you do it at the water's edge, which I'll get to, that's actually where it's most powerful. How your city reinvents itself and its economy is often at the water's edge. But the stuff is not that expensive, and you've done a lot of this so beautifully here on the waterfront. This sort of temporary, lighter, quicker, cheaper approaches to change the markets. This is the way to create informality, lower barriers to entry, to incubate the businesses, the maker culture. This maker culture that you have here is so key. But this is how cities have been built. They've been built through a project-driven, design-led approach. We might have really well-intentioned ideas, but we get public input after the idea has been developed, and the project can only become a little less bad. The idea is developed through one discipline, through one department. So it might be, and I don't know as much about the key projects, but this is the way it's done in a lot of cities. Whether if it's a transportation plan, even if it's a really progressive mobility plan, it doesn't look at it holistically enough. So we think we need to turn these projects inside out, start and upside down, and start with place and identify the stakeholders, the place assets, the economic assets, as broadly as possible, but around a distinct area. We have these tools, the power of 10 and this place game to evaluate a place and develop a vision uses and activities, and not asking communities to design it or do the technical parts necessarily, but more the uses, the experience, the feelings they want to have there. And then to start doing things, build capacity through trials and experiments, and how it's that iterative approach. And hopefully you make some mistakes and get some bad press, and that creates a backlash, and then you get a backlash to the backlash, because that's when there becomes some energy. So placemaking, this diagram was created by the Dutch Roads Ministry after we'd done a lot of training with them, and we didn't understand why they would want us to do anything, because the Dutch designed such great streets and public spaces. And they said traditional planning was you do the process, then you design it, then you hope it gets used. But placemaking is not planning, it's doing, and it is an ongoing evolution of engagement, of building capacity, of focusing on use, designing to support use, and you get to bigger, bolder things through this more iterative process. Waterfronts, though, are the best way to do this. I'm not going to go into this much, but we have the principles of how do you create great waterfronts on our website, and lots of great case studies. But there's so much more potential for what waterfronts can be and how they can drive the culture, the economy, the innovation of a city. But the debate, the process of defining your city at the water's edge, what your face to the world is the process of defining your whole city, but at these small key places. It doesn't become so abstract. These are these sort of these innovation hubs. But this presentation will be online as well. But Granville Island is one of our most favorite waterfronts, one of our most favorite public destinations, districts in the city. But it's at this human scale, the granular level of it. It's the food, the pie that I'm drawn back to every time. It's the maker culture that's so prevalent, the sort of the incubating of small businesses and ideas, and the food culture. There, they get the best buskers from all around the world, there in Quebec City. Where's the place where the best buskers in the world are going to come to in Halifax? We did a master plan it was really a placemaking plan for Granville Island around their key destinations, looking at their key uses. But it's the layering of all these uses where the magic happens, the intricate minglings, where the innovation can occur. And there's these key destinations that ultimately define a district too. And they still have the industrial feel. It's the commingling of the cement factory with the university, which is unfortunately leaving, the market, the kids elements that really ground it in play and fun, with the artist makers so prevalent in the light industry, the boat building, and so forth. All that connected and layered is what makes it so magical. It has rarely been created, or so much of waterfronts are defined by one single use alone. And they're all competing to define it. And just green space and parks is never enough for a waterfront. It has to be defined by these multi-use destinations. And how to do that is often, the limiting factor is often governance. For the limiting factor, as I mentioned, for public spaces is public space management, but it's also the silos of different departments. So place is a silo buster. I was just with this friend Neil McEnroy, who runs the Center for Local Economic Strategies in Manchester. We've been working in New Zealand. This is our third trip, working actually with a similar agency to develop Halifax that has led the placemaking weeks there. They started as Waterfront Auckland and did such a great job at place-led development, just as you had here, that they became the development agency for all of Auckland, and facilitating the placemaking movement nationally now. But Neil says that place eats institutional divisions for breakfast. Place is this disruptor. And it not only challenges the relationships between us all, but creates a more fun culture, a more collaborative culture, and reevaluates how we measure our success. In Adelaide, Australia, where I've worked a lot with the CEO, Peter Smith, who's now the CEO of Port Phillip in Melbourne, he came to New York, saw these temporary activations, and said, let's copy them, but let's make a much more systemic change. Let's do these temporary activations of public space to improve them. First top down, with the idea that anything could be removed within 24 hours. But he saw placemaking as a way to reinvent city. He says that placemaking is the single most important strategy that governments can adopt to build community and citizen capacity over time. And so this small activation program became a means to sort of infect and reinvent their city governance, to change how they evaluate their success using these place criteria, to actually eventually to devolve government to the districts, the precinct scale a little bit. First, government gets more holistic and collaborative, but and so forth. So we're seeing this now lead to a new paradigm. We've been working with Brookings for a few years now, looking at how they were finding innovation districts weren't that innovative or inclusive necessarily, and seeing how place can help reinvent innovation districts, which is this trend and this idea going globally. But this nexus between economy shaping and place shaping, placemaking, is this realm that's creating these new models of governance that I think Indy has started to allude to. Hopefully we can discuss more. It's not just talent attraction, but capacity building, talent evolution, potential building from the people that are already there. They create this experimenting, this faster rate of learning, the collisionable activities. It's the fun, this serendipity that increases within cities when people work in this way. That's what happens. It's the social density. The best places in this world, you can have social density on a rural Main Street. We don't see a huge correlation between density and social density. So it's a good public realm acts like social density, and we think this is what drives innovation, but also inclusion. And then you'll hear from Matthew later. He's researching how can the types of innovation, how can we get better innovation that actually reflects and supports a more human-centered world, more the capacity of humans, not computers, to create change. How do we get better change, better innovation from place-led, place-grounded innovation hubs? So these innovation hubs have to bring together innovation assets, place assets with networking assets in one destination. It's this intricate minglings again. This is where it works. And so it's a few places within Halifax that are going to create the magic, that create the new ideas. They're going to reinvent how you're seen locally, going to develop the lovability, the place attachment, not just the livability. You're not going to compete with other cities or achieve livability with the livability that other cities have through focusing on livability alone, the infrastructure, the copying of the better design. It's through this informality, this intermingling, this lovability that you're going to achieve livability more affordably, inclusively, and quickly. And that placemaking it's a language and a framework to tie this together, to make it more accessible, more common sense, and to democratize the shaping of cities, the shaping of reinventing of governance, as Indy said. So I'm really excited to get to be part of this whole conversation. This is the start of something we're going to be involved throughout our lives, all of us, to connect with this and learn from you all as you go through this and become a model globally. You are a model globally, but you have a lot of responsibility, both to your community, to your place, but to how the learnings here can infect the Canadian placemaking movement and the global one as well. So we're in it with you for the long run. Looking forward to the continued conversation. Thank you.